Welcome to Rock Center Shorts. My name is Mike Callahan. I'm a professor of the practice and executive director of the Rock Center for Corporate Governance here at Stanford Law School. And our guest today is General Stanley McChrystal, who retired in July 2010 as a four-star general in the United States Army. He was Commander, International Security Assistance Forces, Afghanistan. He had previously served as Director, Joint Staff, and Commander, Joint Special Operations Command. Stan is the author of My Share of the Task, Team of Teams and Leaders. He is currently a senior fellow at Yale University's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs and the co-founder of the McChrystal Group, a leadership consulting firm. Thank you, Stan, for taking the time to join us this morning.
You're kind of having me, Mike.
So today we're going to talk about a favorite topic for corporate directors, risk. And you recently published a new book called Risk, a User's Guide. So could you give us a sense of the central goal of the book and why you and your colleague wrote it?
Well, I wrote it at this stage in my life because I became convinced I didn't deal with risk very well. And I don't think the organizations that I've been a part of or watched do it all that well either. And you say, now, wait a minute, there's great scholarship on risk. There's things about probability and we're taught how to deal with it. But then when you actually watch it in practice, how many times do we drop the ball? How many times do we just not get it right? And so I paired with my co-author, a young 25-year-old graduate of Vanderbilt who worked in my firm, because we wanted to have different perspectives. We wanted to come at this thing differently, different generations, backgrounds, and whatnot, which was what we did. And we got this ambitious title that says Risk, a User's Guide, because what we're trying to communicate is we all deal with risk. So we all need to think about it maybe a bit differently than we have before.
Terrific. And so one of the things that we focus on at the Rock Center is really working with principally board members and corporate executives. And you serve as a board member and also an advisor to boards and executives, and you have a unique perspective, obviously. So what are some of the key takeaways from your work and analysis for that group of leaders in the boardroom?
I think boards particularly have an interesting challenge because you bring a group of people together only episodically. You're trying to build them into a cohesive team, and they're going to make very difficult decisions, sometimes around risk. And they should be watching the management of a company and the direction in which the organization's going, and sort of using their experience and expertise to sniff out risk that might not be as evident to the management team as it could be. And yet often boards don't seem to get it right. There's the great case, of course, on Overstock.com. When Patrick Byrne, the CEO, starts acting erratically, and enough so that he is in social media, he is putting out things that a Sith Lord is out to get him and things like that, which are not normal. And yet the board didn't do anything because he was producing good business results. And so when I talk about this, it's the ability to open up your aperture enough to see risk in a big way. The risks maybe not of making the money next quarter, but what are the truly existential risks? I spent 2 years on the board of Deutsche Bank USA, and we looked at risk all the time. And we had these calculations for risk models to go through money. And then on the other side of the ledger, we would also have other risks like reputational risk, loss of talent, things like that, which are the truly existential risk to an organization like a major bank. And yet, because they're not easily calculable and you can't put them in a set model, we have a tendency to just look at them and go, well, that would be bad, and then move on. When in reality, boards should be helping the organization say, what are we actually doing about some of these?
And so in a user's guide, how do you break that down for board members to try to put it into practice for their organizations?
We start with the idea that every organization has what we call a risk immune system. Now, a human immune system does four things. It detects threats to us, assesses each threat that comes. It then responds by destroying those threats and learns in the process. And so it gets better each time. And it's estimated that we ingest about 10,000 microorganisms a day, any one of which could make us sick or kill us. But we don't worry too much about it because it just does until it stops working. And then our immune deficiency comes in. Suddenly we're vulnerable to all kinds of sicknesses. And of course, we see big health effects. Organizations, we argue, have a risk immune system. Now, it's made up of 10 factors or risk control factors, like its ability to communicate, the strength of its narrative, its ability to act, to overcome inertia, the ability to adapt when necessary, to get the timing right, to overcome the inherent biases that every individual and organization possesses, to get the ability to leverage diversity so that you get different perspectives and expertise on the problem, the ability to bring leadership to pull all of this together. And if an organization understands that these factors, none of which will ever be perfect, but if you can keep them healthy in a risk fit system is what we would describe, then suddenly you don't have to predict every risk perfectly. You don't have to know what pitch the pitcher's throwing next. Essentially, you're learning how to read the spin of the ball and the hit. And so we argue that organizations often spend far too much time looking over the hill, around the corner, into the dark, trying to predict that external risk, when in reality, if they look at what they do have agency and control over, it is how vulnerable they are or how healthy they are, and they can be prepared to accept those risks, which are inevitable.
It's a great perspective, and I'm thinking about the work that directors do and their advisors to try to think about addressing these areas, and your point about getting caught up in so many of the particular things versus having a systemic approach. It sounds like it's going to be a terrific framework to work with. I saw a tagline, I think in another post or work that you guys did, that said the biggest risk to us is us. Could you say a little more about that? That's just fascinating, I think, way to think about it.
Absolutely. And that's the conclusion we reached. And on one hand, it's very upsetting because you realize we're the biggest problem. But on the other hand, because we have control over us, we're also the opportunity. And I would use COVID-19 as an example. We started this book a month before COVID struck in December of 2019. So we didn't see it coming. But what we found is we ought to be celebrating a big win right now, because actually COVID-19 was a threat we knew was coming, not that particular novel coronavirus, but they come with frightening regularity. And so we have absolute assuredness that we're going to get this challenge. And second, we know what to do about it. We have experience in public health and dealing with this kind of challenge. So we know it's coming, we know what to do. And in 2019, we'd even run an exercise called Crimson Contagion, the Department of Health and Human Services. And it was based on a scenario of an American traveler coming back from China, is infected with a viral pathogen, lands at Chicago. His son picks him up at the airport and drives him home. He's feeling bad, so he goes home to go to bed. The son goes to a rock concert, and 500,000 people die over the next months because America drops the ball, doesn't have the right protective equipment, doesn't communicate well, doesn't get a clear narrative, doesn't have strong leadership. And this exercise, which took place over 2019, produced a 76-page set of lessons learned and after action that came out in the fall of 2019. And yet almost everything there played itself out again when COVID-19 and reality struck. And in COVID-19, we even had a wild card we didn't expect. We got vaccines faster than any time in human history. So if you put together those three advantages, we know what's coming, we know what to do about it, and we get this extraordinary gift of rapid vaccines. And yet still, we've had 750,000 Americans lose their lives and many around the world. It's a massive case of the biggest weakness of this was us, and we got to do better.
That's a fascinating story. I wasn't aware of the prior work that had been done to study the area. And I can imagine as boards digest sort of the new risks that they're confronting, and we could do a whole another hour-long session on all of those, but using your framework and your colleagues' framework to attack that area and really step back and think about it, I can imagine there's going to be a lot of traction. What a great piece of contributions to everybody's work in the boardroom.
Well, it's very interesting, and boards have that special responsibility because they don't have to do things on a daily basis. They don't have to ship products. They ought to be thinking, they ought to be talking, they ought to be able to step back, take a deep breath and say, what are the real risks and how healthy is this team that we are supporting?
That's terrific. Thank you. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. Stan, thanks so much for taking the time to join us this morning and sharing these terrific insights and perspectives.
Complete honor for me. Thank you, Mike.
And thank you to our audience for joining us.